And this session is recorded separately from my yesterday's session. And as you are aware, if you have ever just taken notice of the slides I start with a kind of again, warming up, a more general beginning. And I included some of the slides here, which I already showed to you yesterday, but we will do it, short and quick, so that you don't get bored right now in the morning, but just to be aware that this, just don't jump into the middle of governance and reporting. We just, again, recall what we have learned and what we have been aware of yesterday. So therefore, the starting is a bit similar. And I touched a bit on corporate governance, which has been, in more detail been addressed by Vera in terms of the CSDDD. Again, I try to, provide some and find some structures, even when they are difficult to see and to find, and even when regulation doesn't really follow in any kind of comprehensive agenda, what's just the normal thing for sustainability regulation, as the matter as such is so complex and diverse, as we know. And then you see the main part goes on sustainability reporting. Don't worry about the number of the slides. There are a number of things I just want to show you. And you can then read up later on if you want to. And again, some pictures also included there. Just briefly, for those who only watch the video here, and welcome also to those then sometime later on the web. What are the key drivers, including for corporate governance and reporting in sustainability matters? On the one hand, the climate change as the overwhelming, overarching objective, threat and a topic. And on the other hand, the sustainable development worldwide. Just wanted to repeat and emphasize from my point of view that the SDGs are kind of very broad on the one hand, and as you see, they have been introduced or have been agreed on 3 months before the climate agreement. So it wasn't just sure that there would be a climate agreement, so therefore just at least climate action has been included. And number 13, but this is aimed, from my kind of firm understanding, as a worldwide development exercise and ambition, which may not just be focused on Central Europe, the EU, and places like those where we are generally from. So that I always say to our clients, if you go ahead with your sustainability agenda and strategy, and you say we are in line with the SDGs and we follow SDGs, blah, 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 numbers, so and so, just take a look at your business model. Is this local? Is this European? Is this global? Are you really in any way following up to these goals, or is it just by accident covered by them? And then consider if you see a greenwashing risk in just overemphasizing your alignment with SDGs, which have possibly another agenda in mind. And anyway, as you know, and we see it, I didn't mention it yesterday, I think, on the right-hand top, what the achievement, however, if you can measure it, that's the question, but there was a kind of an interim report at half-time, so to say, from 2015 to 2030, last year in July. Most things are moderately or severely off track, or even stagnation or regression was noticed. So we will, I think, in the coming years anyway, see another agenda, because 2030 is approaching rapidly. What we didn't touch upon yesterday, because this relates more closely to governance and reporting, is referred to in various instances. It was mentioned yesterday, talking about the minimum safeguards under the taxonomy. These are being referred to in the CSRD and in increasingly other places. That we, on the one hand, have the UN guiding principles, and this is generally what we would understand as being soft law, so to say. But it becomes more and more hard law from a legal perspective. Interestingly, these kind of international initiatives, agreements, things like that, don't have a kind of immediately binding effect on any parties, as we are aware, therefore soft law. But on the other hand, they may become even more than programmatic. But I'm not sure, on the other hand, if people who have drafted these and agreed on these kind of rules have ever anticipated that they may become, by reference, a part of an EU binding framework of rules. And what we see here is the state duty to protect human rights and the corporate responsibility. It was just striking my eye some time ago. In Germany, and I believe in other places, people have started discussions on, the sense, and we touched upon it, of course, yesterday in Vera's slot, whether the protection of human rights is a task for European EU enterprises, in any place of the world, and whether we would just kind of extend values and things which are, so to say, self-explanatory for us to other places of the world where they are still not, for various reasons, referring back to the SDG agenda. And this is the kind of the first time I've seen that there has been a reference or a link made between human rights and corporates. Because, I mean, generally I would understand that human rights are an issue which you have a human right, you have a basic right in a constitution where it is stipulated and so on, like in Germany in the Grundgesetz, but this addresses your individual rights towards the state authority. But here, this is put together with corporates, and possibly this is one of the origins of the idea that corporates may be in a position to deal with human rights, because it's a very strong and bold concept. But as we have also heard yesterday already from Vera, and this applies to all the acts I know, including the German one on the supply chains, it is not that we invent some new rules, some new concepts, that we have kind of European agendas which we extend to the whole world, so to say. These are usually, internationally relevant agreements, initiatives, and so on, like this one. And as far as I'm aware, usually the states where you find some human rights issues of critical nature outside of Europe, the states themselves very often or almost all the time have signed themselves, those kind of treaties, agreements, whatsoever. It's just a matter of enforcement then, of course. Another thing, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, this addresses explicitly the enterprises. It's not only about human rights, it's about a number of things you see listed there, including human rights and the environment and a number of other things. All these are referenced in the taxonomy, and in particular this one, and the guiding principles are referenced in the CSRD, coming to that later. Then we got a revised version of last June. And just finally, ILO conventions and International Bill of Human Rights. I had not expected years ago to deal with these matters in more detail in my legal career, but also being referenced to in those acts, the taxonomy in particular. And then, one of those developments I think I mentioned yesterday already, beyond climate, beyond the Paris Agreement's scope, we are all aware that there's not only a climate but also an environmental agenda. And so watch out for those things. I called it then green transition in addition to the net zero transition, biodiversity, water, and other things. And then on the bottom, in a number of legal acts, later I got a kind of a collection slide, which you see here at the bottom, that we got an EU nature restoration law, which has bold ambitions to kind of, getting back to natural areas in their original shape. And we talked about yesterday what the government crisis in Austria caused by this and other places. So this will be a serious issue as soon as anyone has realized that this exists. We are all aware of the EU Action Plan. The only thing I want to show you here is that, or remind you of, it was still, in a way foreseen in the EU Action Plan, which was so much focused on investments. That on the right-hand side, when it talks about accounting, here, reporting is meant in terms of sustainability reporting and corporate governance, and these are the topics of the day. The Sustainable Finance Package, just for the sake of completeness, not in a way specific towards governance and reporting, but, transition and its importance as already discussed. These are also not new things, but just put it in the context of today. again, we are moving on from sustainable finance. Possibly we can discuss later in the roundtable. We got a list of topics we would like to discuss with you. What do you understand under sustainable finance, if you would like to discuss? And I think I mentioned yesterday already. And what does it mean? And here we move towards, I believe that's not a term which has been established somehow in a similar way in the discussion, talking about sustainable corporate governance. But I feel free to call it that way. And these are just, exactly the points we are talking about. Transparency for purposes, of course, of people going to fund the transition, and other things in terms of sustainability and due diligence obligations, in particular of those who are responsible for the enterprises which need to be part of the transition. The timeline, the same again, but this time looking at the boxes in the middle at the bottom and the right-hand side, where you see those colors just going up more and more, and including those points just right now, and we see 2024 just in the middle of these developments. And this is just a selection of things, in terms of corporate governance. I show you some things later which are not on this slide. We discussed what about SDGs, what about sustainability, what about ESG, and we will see in the definition and for the purposes of sustainability reporting, ESG has found its way into those rules in a way we will look at later. And what we just then briefly to close this first part, when we talk to clients, they have an issue, they need to report either from this year or next year at the latest. They face the issue of how is my governance, am I in any way prepared, who's responsible, and so on and so on. And what do I do with ESG? And then we say, yeah, look at your tasks, look at your ambition, look at your compliance, but also at your business in particular, because sustainability is not a compliance issue. For us, for you, in your roles respectively, it is a compliance issue to a certain or large extent, but for the business, for the enterprises, it's a business issue, first of all, and it needs to be. So this is about, the net zero green transition with all its implications. And again, if you want to look at it, supply chains, and coming to supply chains in a moment again. And as you see, in each case, I just put the governance on the right-hand side, as a facilitating factor and invariably relevant for getting those things into effect. Of course, this is all simplified and just some food for thought, if you would like. Looking at a few issues about, what I would call sustainable corporate governance, and then coming already to sustainability reporting. I try to not to speak until 10:30 because experience from yesterday has shown, and including for the purposes of the online participants, that people become more and more encouraged or feel encouraged to ask questions at the end. So then I try to leave as much of the end as possible. So looking at sustainable corporate governance, in line with my earlier slide, what does it comprise and what can be objects of regulation generally? We try to put things more in a kind of a framework, in a structure to understand and to be prepared for all the other things to come. Boards and board members, I believe I just showed you some, I'm always not quite sure whether you are really interested in examples from Germany or not, but anyway, this is just what I can talk about here, that in the German stock corporation law, there is one provision which has been included some years ago, which says that the remuneration of the board members to be set by the supervisory board. In Germany we got the model of, we got a board of directors and then we got a supervisory board, which are separate entities, and the supervisory board, so separate entities within the organization, so to say, and the supervisory board, comprises shareholders and others, so they have in no way operational duties. And so there, the Stock Corporation Act says, when setting the remuneration and finding some kind of principles for the remuneration of the board members, the supervisory board shall consider sustainability issues of the companies, more or less, so to say. And of course, in legal commentaries, you can heavily debate about what is meant and so on, including in particular with the evolving ESG sustainability agenda. But as it is worded, and usually one would consider that this means the core issue of the commercial sustainability of the company, so that you don't just look for your 5-year contract as a board member, but you look at, not for the quarterly reports, so to say, you look for the long-term health, financial health of the company, a long-term and sustainable business model, just in economical terms. But other than this, we have seen the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance, but this again, I didn't cover them before. I have not. We had them already, I think, in an earlier conference. This is, I would say, even a softer law than the other ones, which you can just take into account. But as to my experience in practice, this is not, in a way, has not a leading role so far. But here I would believe, remuneration would be a core issue and can be a core issue. And then due diligence, this is just in German, we call it a Sorgfaltspflicht. People sometimes mix it up with a kind of, a corporate transactional context where you do a due diligence, financial, legal, tax due diligence when looking at other enterprises. Here, the due diligence always means looking at your own enterprise and looking how things work. Therefore, I called it due diligence in the ordinary course of business. In Germany, we call due diligence in a transactional context due diligence, and this we call Sorgfaltspflicht, if it's not in a way which means duty of care generally or something like that, as long as it's not called due diligence in the text itself. We will see that later. CSDDD has been dealt with yesterday, and you showed a lot of interest in that. We can discuss later on a few things. I just also picked up some points and just have, I think, 2 slides on it in a moment. And just to be aware that, and in Germany, you learned yesterday, or you knew it before, we have a Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which was put into force 2-3 years ago. But this is explicitly about supply chains. And this is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and we learned that it's about the chain of activity, and many people called it a supply chain directive. But I would say, it's included, but it contains a lot more things, and you're aware of this. And then we got more specific due diligence requirements regarding corporate sustainability. I just named a few, and we will come back to them in a kind of an overview slide I provide you with in a moment. And we come to non-financial, respectively, sustainability reporting a bit later on, which comprised the old way, the NFRD, then came in a kind of a way to bridge from the old non-financial reporting world, which was voluntary, which was, the standards to choose were voluntary. Some corporates needed to adhere thereto, but only few, and in no way audited necessarily, and so on and so on. Not so strict obligations, in practice also not being lived up in a way, at least as from my experience, that you could say this is really a sustainability ambition involved. It was more called like corporate social responsibility. CSR was usually something which people had in mind when talking about the non-financial reporting. As I said, Article 8 taxonomy tried to build a bridge. As we know, taxonomy doesn't serve generally the purpose, I always repeat that, of reporting, but this article was included, and then came the CSRD and parallel, at international level from the IFRS initiatives and ISSB, they have published already 2 years ago their sustainability disclosure standards for countries outside of the EU. And as far as I understand, the developments are quite different. You hear from Australia, from Canada, from Switzerland, but generally speaking, it appears to me that the EU, is not standing alone with its approach of enhanced and stricter sustainability reporting, but many, many countries follow, and in a similar way, with or without, under SDS under IFRS S1 and S2. So things are heavily under development. Just taking a brief look back, to the CSDDD. Just looking at the Article 1, what is the contents? And here you see it, obligations as regarding those human rights and environmental adverse impacts relating to that kind of activity chain, liability, and the obligation to adopt and put into effect a transition plan. So this is, I always tell, I do trainings regularly with people from the industry, real economy, financial services industry, and these are usually not lawyers. And I try to tell them a little bit about what's the difference between a regulation and a directive and so on and so on. And usually in practice they don't read themselves regulations or directives. And then I used to tell them, and just want to share with you, if you look, for example, at the CSDDD and you see it has 60 pages, we would possibly say, oh, it's rather short, but they would say, oh, God, And then you see the first 25 pages are recitals. We learned yesterday, and we may discuss later, that you also need to read the recitals to become an idea of what should really be governed or not. I don't know if this is the way legislation should work, but anyway, it appears to work that way. And then I say, look, and then you look into Articles 1, 2, and 3, and then you generally, for your purposes, have an idea what you are dealing with, if you don't need to know details. And look into Article 1, just simply, you see that the legislator has put these three things in a equal order, so to say, showing, from my point of view in particular, the relevance of the transition plan. Although, of course, and we see it below, the due diligence obligations are so detailed, and we have so many articles on it. And possibly this is a little bit of another emphasis, as Vera has put it yesterday, from my, as I would say, practical point of view. I would just look with you at Articles 13 and 14, these kind of meaningful engagement with stakeholders and the complaints procedure, which are matters, as I understand, in the usual course of a business, of an enterprise. These are bigger enterprises, and we have seen the phasing in, so it takes time until these 500 million euro enterprises will be covered. I think it's 2029. But anyway, this is usually nothing I can expect a client from the real economy to be familiar with and to be happy about, that they need to, on the one hand, have an engagement. You need a stakeholder dialogue for reporting purposes. We come to this a bit later. But in a way, an engagement with stakeholders, providing them with corporate information, and in terms of complaints, where many kind of NGO-like things, and there's, I think, one of those are called human rights defenders. In the German text, it says Menschenrechtsverteidiger. Okay, this is your role, but for the normal person, having heard the first time about ein Menschenrechtsverteidiger, sounds quite special. And I then always say, and you are not in the room then, of course, I always say this appears to be a new job profile, but it still is, already. So, but I haven't heard the term before, to be honest. Possibly it's just up to me. But this means, I'm not saying this is not relevant and should be important. I just say from the perspective of the corporate, this is quite odd and very new, I would say, for the normal corporate with, say, 500 million euros of turnover. And then again, all these corporate sustainability matters go along. You got the duties, then more or less cumbersome, more or less detailed. And if you look into the CSDDD, how detailed the rules are formulated to a certain extent, it really strikes the eye from my personal impression. And then it goes along with supervisory authorities and penalties. And so you move more and more into the space of supervision throughout your business operations. And when Vera yesterday talked about these kind of naming and shaming, together with penalties and things followed up by authorities. I mean, in the financial services area, it's already just day-to-day practice widely that you just impose certain sanctions and you just publish them immediately as soon as they are effective, and you don't have a remedy as the affected institution publish it on the website. And BaFin, for example, the German regulator, publishes every day 3, 4, 5 kind of press releases, so to say, or notices about measures, against institutions and others in terms of risk management, failures, and so on and so on. And the civil liability was mentioned already yesterday. But anyway, we talk about rules. We talk about, or we face enterprises which tend to complain about it. And I know a lot of enterprises who complain about it and always say, look at 2 things. Point 1, are you sure that you're not interested in your supply chain participants? Yeah? I mean, we have seen COVID. We have seen after the Ukraine war started. We see when we got these kind of weather instances, flooding, other things. Every time people discuss about, interruptions of supply chains and how stable they are, where you get your things from, and so on and so on. So I'm just in doubt whether it's a real reasonable business argument to say, that's so cumbersome, to know all my suppliers. And in practice, then I think quite often, and so the discussion about how big needs an enterprise to be covered by regulation, and what about these 450 million plus euros enterprises under CSDDD and. I just wanted to share the Apple example with you. Apple, of course, has uses to publish smart environmental progress reports with 150 pages or so. And in October 2022, Apple just did a, so to say, smart move. They announced, and they will have spoken to them before, I hope, or not, I don't. They announced that they are now going for net zero with their products for 2030. And they formulated it in a way that Apple accelerates the cooperation with its suppliers in order to become net zero in 2030. And if you look at your iPhone, how much of that is being manufactured by Apple itself? I would guess between 0 and 0.5%. And so this means all the others need to contribute to net zero. And have you seen people demonstrating, complaining loudly at marketplaces in cities, being kind of an association of poorly handled Apple suppliers, complaining about the market power of Apple and how bad it is to be treated like that? In Germany, not. So this is just the matter of fact, how market works. I want to be an Apple supplier, and I just take what I'm asked to. 2030 is quite an ambitious point in time, but on the other hand, this is Apple, and we all, I believe, more or less fancy those products. And just a kind of not going into every detail, but just a certain impression. I did a training the other week for a large German chain of textile discounters, and so I tried to pick up and had a dialogue with them of some other rules I usually don't deal with every day. And just an impression, most of these you will know. Yesterday we talked about these kind of POP regulation. I left it away here. I had it before. I thought just leave it away. On the left-hand side, those which are already in effect, where I would say with immediate relevance. In the middle, those which are underway. On the right-hand side, to other things, one of those which is a bit more specific and which is already existing, and the other thing which is underway. What we are talking about? Deforestation, additional due diligence obligations in terms of not getting products related to Sorry, this is about materials. Yeah, it's like coffee and palm oil and a few other things. Not importing those and distributing them within the EU, where a deforestation practice may have been involved, and then you need a due diligence a statement if you do so, and. Then what colleagues from me who are more familiar with it, going just down on the left-hand side, told me to call the CBAM regulation, the cross-border adjustment mechanism, which is about, in addition to emission trading, so that you get this kind of balance between things also relating to a certain list of materials like steel and other things coming into the EU, not being in a way or not containing in a way included a certain portion of a carbon pricing, so that you then get a balanced way and a level playing field. This is just about to come into existence over the next few years. Kind of information collecting has already started. The Net Zero Industry Act, quite new about empowering net zero technologies. This is not in a way technically possibly a governance issue, but at least these are issues if you are responsible for an enterprise which is involved with anything which is listed here, then of course this should be on top of the agenda of the board. The eco-design regulation, also a new thing, requirements for sustainable products, and again you see a directive is being repealed, and then we got a regulation. I believe it's a way of getting EU rules more strict and more directly applicable over the time. And in addition to that, the promoting the repair of goods directive, then we got a directive. By the way, the others were all regulations. And as you see, in particular, the three ones on the left-hand side from the bottom, these are all from the 13th of June. So this was just in the course of before and during and after the elections, when things were just going on and were finally made law. So a lot of things happened in the past months. What is still underway, and one should have an eye on, not just the UK Slavery Act, it's the forced labor regulation where we got the European Parliament agreement. This will come, if it comes, with a kind of a ban on products to be sold within the EU where there is a connection to forced labor. And this includes then that products may be, I think the rule says, may be disposed of, which just means they will need to be binned, so they will be destroyed. And again, this goes along with penalties, with authorities, and other things. Packaging is relevant, again, regulation instead of directive, with the so-called extended producer responsibility, that you become responsible for kind of, one of the terms is this kind of fast fashion issue, what happens with your product during the life cycle, and as regards waste, other things are underway. On the right-hand side, this is more, chemical issues. What we call microplastic in German, it's called synthetic polymer microparticles, at least officially in the text, so that these microplastic things shall be prohibited generally. And this is what we in German, the PFAS, call Ewigkeitschemikalien, so a kind of, all-time chemical things which do not disappear because they are in no way, nature doesn't cope with, getting rid of them. They still stay where they are. And so many products, more or less everything you use in the kitchen and elsewhere, more or less contains these things. And so there's a heavy debate. The European Chemical Agency is in the lead, whether you could ban this or not, and what would it mean. So a lot of things, and you can subsume this under the Green Deal, so to say. This goes in addition, clearly in addition to sustainable finance, to the kind of reporting and governance initiatives under CSRD and CSDDD. And you just need to look not to get lost within the details, and you see a number of those things. like packaging and waste, they have always been regulated. So it depends on whether you now put them under the sustainability agenda, but of course it belongs to that. Just as an impression, we got general rules for corporate due diligence, CSDDD, and we got an increasing number of special rules for this. The EU Commission issued a Q&A document on the CSDDD some weeks ago, and they said, this is the one is the Lex Generalis, and the other one are the Leges Specialis. So finally, I'm reporting. Oh, it's already 10 past anyway. I already mentioned, NFRD was the old world. Now we are at CSRD, but just be aware, technically it's all the accounting directive, which is also relevant for financial reporting. And now the amendments by the NFRD have been replaced and amended additionally by CSRD. While before financial reporting was key, non-financial reporting, so to say, was, if I can say, the stepchild within that. Although taxonomy reporting tried, as a bridge to just align with that in a way, as Article 8 from the beginning said, and still says, this has not been changed anyway, if an enterprise, in particular non-financial enterprise, is subject to non-financial reporting, then taxonomy reporting shall be relevant in addition. And now we are in a world, my audit colleagues, of course, are happy that it's not only financial reporting, which is key for enterprises, but also sustainability reporting. And always bear in mind, the purpose of financial reporting is to provide transparency. Whether the figures of the company are good or bad, from an investors, from a counterparty's perspective, from a bank's perspective, the regulation and rules don't care about it. Sustainability reporting is not just for making transparent that enterprises do not act sustainably. It's meant for the purpose of, and there you can also find it in some recitals where it's mentioned, making enterprises accountable for their sustainability ambitions and making them going underway towards sustainability in their activities. And this is what we now have with the CSRD and the ESRS as a level 2 delegated act, as a delegated regulation, which is directly applicable irrespective of CSRD requiring transposition into national laws. And you are already aware of the key issues, from non-financial to sustainability reporting. I mentioned that before. Part of the management report, mandatory audit. This is subject still to implementation into national laws. In Germany, the national laws, and you see it, 6th July was the deadline. The government proposal for the draft bill for the implementation was issued on, I think, the 24th of July. Then there was a summer break, and now we still wait for implementation into national laws, hopefully still this year. And national laws may then govern whether it needs to be an auditor, technically, to audit the sustainability reporting, or whether it can be other enterprises, technical institutions and so on. Reporting standards we'll talk about, and this we have touched upon also. It has started to apply beginning of this year to those, so to say, larger undertakings which are public interest entities, which are either in particular credit institutions or listed companies from the real economy, particularly with more than 500 employees and more than 50 million of turnover. This has been changed. You find it in the first top of the gray boxes just over the past months, and balance sheet of 25. Then you're a large company, and for all the other ones, so you meet 2 out of 3 criteria: 50 million euros turnover, 25 million balance sheet, and then 250 employees. for the purposes of 2025 and ongoing. If you meet 2 or 3 criteria of those, then you will be subject to reporting next year. Then we see capital market oriented, in particular SMEs, and non-EU undertakings later on from 2028. So the large bunch will be next year, 2025, and you see the thresholds are in a way that a number of enterprises will be covered, and this year still those which are listed or credit institutions and a bit bigger ones. Briefly looking at the text of the rules, sustainability matters are defined, it looks like ESG with a reference to the disclosure regulation, and then you find explicitly in Article 19A, this kind of double materiality perspective. I have a slide on it in a moment, specifically the undertaking's impacts on sustainability matters, so externally, and how sustainability matters affect the undertaking's development, performance, and position, so the risk, the financial perspective, and then again, it's not non-financial reporting. The risk perspective is financially relevant, and you need, of course, to align it with financial reporting. And then you see the list of all these interesting things about the business model and the strategy, transition planning, stakeholders, how the strategy is implemented, your time-bound targets, and one of my favorites, the role of the administrative management and supervisory bodies, and of their expertise and skills in relation to this. This is also a large field for training, I believe. And then here you see the due diligence process implemented. Again, this is what refers to the general due diligence duties within the enterprise. So just a long list, and the provision on the standards then repeats it somehow. But here we see the ambition, cover and touch upon all the things regarding an enterprise which are crucial and to be known. And here just, you know that, the inside out and outside in perspective with the risk and the impact and the sustainability matters. And just to repeat, I know you would not again like to hear this because I said it 10 times. There is a G with the enterprise, but I still don't see a G outside there, which is not linked to any institution or any other thing, but just for the sake of completeness. And we have seen yesterday, these kind of double direction of views. You see under risk management rules, you see it under SFDR, and you specifically see it here. Taxonomy reporting, as I said, on the left-hand side, you see the text, which has been introduced, so to say, the night before the final rules had been agreed on. Those days in 2029, 2022, have a rule, of addressing also non-financial undertakings, which are usually and generally not subject to the taxonomy because these were only financial market participants, so that they need to provide KPIs, turnover, taxonomy alignment in particular now, and then the capital expenditure and the operational expenditure. And you got a delegated act, a specific Article 8 delegated act with a lot of pages and lots of annexes where you find detailed requirements how to report it. And as I said yesterday, this really usually when enterprises ask us, would you like to assist us with sustainability reporting? And we have done a few things already, but for taxonomy purposes, we are still at the beginning. This is what we usually hear. Those enterprises which come close to it first time next year. And we got a number of commission notices, FAQ, and I got a bunch of papers of those where you all find detailed guidance on how you can deal with this and that. And the devil really is in the detail here. The ESIS I mentioned before, this delegated regulation, only 284 pages, which has been published just before Christmas and started to apply 1st of January to those enterprises being obliged to report starting this year. There will be some other standards. We mentioned that, I think yesterday, or I mentioned it, where the deadlines have been postponed by 2 years, so we will wait for them. In the meantime, we may see SME standards. I think Susanne mentioned that yesterday. which are meant as for listed SMEs, and then as a voluntary SME standard for those who want to report nevertheless. We have seen drafts, and we will see final versions soon, I believe. We don't need to look into details of the text, just wanted to highlight, and the bold and italics print is in the original. What are the important issues about it, the impact and financial materiality? And here you see, it's a long text, but anyway, when you talk about impacts, risks, and opportunities, which is a key issue, IRO as an abbreviation, where it says, ESRS do not impose any conduct requirements in relation to due diligence, is a process in which undertakings, blah, blah, how they address, these include negative impacts, is an ongoing practice that upon it may trigger changes in the undertaking strategy, business model, blah, 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 blah. And this is described in the international instruments. So, clear reference to IMA disclosure obligation, and there are due diligence obligations, but referring to these, international instruments. There are no EU law instruments apparently in place, but if you look at is an ongoing practice, then you see this is something core and key for the enterprise. The materiality assessment, I'll show you some things about finally in a moment, which generally needs to be conducted. So reporting is subject to materiality, as financial reporting is anyway and has been all the time. But there are some things you need to report irrespective of materiality. And if you consider climate change not to be relevant, then you need to be specific about it and disclose this specifically. There are rules on transition plans, just to mention it, as it's my favorite and not only mine. ESRS E1 and E4, climate change and biodiversity, both contain rules about how to disclose transition plan related activities, and also say if the undertaking does not have a transition plan in place, it shall indicate whether and if so when it will adopt it. And this goes on for ESRS E4. You can read it up if you would like to. Yeah, the IFRAG, which is the preparating body in that respect, has issued a number of really helpful guidelines. Lately, those three, and their FAQ, I think these have been mentioned yesterday already by Susanne in the beginning from the Commission just recently, to trying to shed some light into details. And then finally, how do we enterprises try to apply those ESRS in practice these days? What's required at the end? Is the sustainability statement. You got general disclosures, coming to this in a moment, under ESRS 2. ESRS 1 is kind of general description of what you need to do, and the reporting rules are under ESRS 2 and ESRS and the topical standards E1 to 5, S1 to 4, and G1. And this comprises a lot of disclosure requirements with the so-called data points. And Article 8 reporting is included now within this kind of framework. And just to be capable of doing it, you need to conduct your double materiality assessment, identifying impacts, risks, and opportunities. Impacts is clear, and risks and opportunities, it always sounds better if you don't only talk about risk, but also about opportunities. This must be the reason why this is included, but doesn't change the double materiality view. You need then, first of all, you need to have a so-called long list, which can be the relevant points. Then you need to assess them and determine them and talk to stakeholders and so on. And then you come to your short list, and you need criteria and thresholds, of course, so that you come to those IRO which you would like to include in your reporting, and all relating to sustainability matters. And as EFRAG has given us some guidance, and we would have possibly done it anyway, first of all, to be able to arrive here, because this is very technical regulation and this is kind of a cumbersome process, just sit together and we start with workshops and things like that. What are the topics of the enterprise? What is really about it? What's its business model? What are the basics? And you talk about that, and then you come step by step from the left-hand side to the right. And the two most important features, ESRS 2, taxonomy is of course important, but under ESRS themselves, and those standards, which you find a list of in ESRS 1, application requirement 16 we just briefly look at, not read it line by line, of course. Looking at ESRS 2, this is what is required to be reported without a materiality test to be applied. You see these governance and strategy and IRO details. And this goes to the root, of the enterprise's strategy, operations, and so on. So you should never underestimate the importance of this. And if you're not prepared at all in that respect, your organization is not prepared, you don't have competent people, you don't have responsible people, you look a bit poor when you report on it. And then you're looking on this list, of ESRS 1, AI 16, where you see, just for you to show it to you, and then you can read it up if you would like to, these topical standards, where it has a topic in each case, then a subtopic and subtopics. This is the way it's done. And for each of those, depending on where you find, the most specific thing, you just need to have this double materiality perspective view, discuss with your stakeholders, what is my enterprise doing in terms of water consumption, inside out, outside in. So this is really not an exercise just for an afternoon. And so it goes on all the time with ESRS. And you see some look rather short, but climate change may be one of the most important ones. And so it goes along with the E standards. It goes on with the S standards, in particular the workforce, and you see what kind of detailed things you find here. In the value chain, similarly, going down to things like water and sanitation. Okay. And the S standards also go on in a very detailed way with consumers and end users. And then you find the G standard, and just be aware, the G standard as such doesn't look that kind of sophisticated and critical, I would say. Other than corporate culture, there are mainly compliance issues, I would say, involved, which you should be able to handle generally, at least in an EU context. And it's called business conduct. The important governance issues are dealt with in ESRS 2, which you need to report anyway. And then just taken from the IG3 list on the data points, here you see ESRS 2, it's not subject to materiality assessment, but goes through, and then depending on materiality assessment, you can read that up if you would like to. And then finally, and I hope you still have questions, or we address the questions then in the roundtable afterwards if you'd like to. How would I recommend these challenges to be addressed in practice? Just 3 final slides on that. First of all, and this should just show what I've been trying to tell you all the time. Step 1, just sit down and lay back, so to say, or take a step back. What am I as an enterprise? Where do I stand? Do I understand sustainability properly for my purposes? What is my ambition level? Am I leader or laggard or in between? Usually, if we show clients kind of a certain levels in a range, which starts with leader, and then it comes strategic integration, and then compliance, and so on. No one wants to be the leader, but more or less everyone wants to be second to that. And then you need some targets, of course, for yourself, and a strategy to move on from where you stand towards those targets. And this is formulating a language exercise also, which even lawyers do. And you have all these requirements from the outside world, including regulation, but as I say, it's a business issue in essence. And if you face a reporting requirement which needs to be externally audited, and you need your sustainability report, you can deal with a certain kind of compliance and being reporting ready, having your information, your processes, just having conducted your materiality analysis. But we always say at the same time, and also as an auditor, you are regulatory-wise, you are enabled and you are allowed to assist clients on their journey. Look at all the other things, which go into reporting and try to make them better and be aligned with an ambition and not only with compliance. And always, if minimum compliance is this, your strategy shouldn't be the same. You just formulate it in other words. We have found strategies in financial institutions who say, we are asking or we are talking to our investors, to our clients about their sustainability preferences when it comes to investments. Fine, I mean, this is governed by MiFID II delegated regulation. And then finally, a little bit of a packed picture. Here's the enterprise. You got, the challenge of net zero green transition, regulatory challenges, and all your stakeholders. And just have a good kind of action item list and have a good sustainable corporate governance with the things I showed you on the slide with the arrow. And then never forget, look at your transition planning, whether it being required only under ESRS E1 and 4 or for other purposes, but for your own kind of sake of the enterprise. And then finally, that's it for the moment.